special episode of Peasants Rise Up broadcast series in lead up to World Localization Day. Peasants Rise Up broadcast series is brought to you by Asian Peasant Coalition and Pan Asia Pacific's No Land, No Life campaign. As you know, this series is tackling issues of landlessness, land grabbing, corporate capture and control, human rights, and range of other issues affecting lives of the peasant people in the whole of Asian region. Friends, in September, the United Nations will be organizing the Food Systems Summit. The stated agenda of the Food Systems Summit is to bring all sectors together and transform the way the world produces, consumes, and thinks about food. This Food Systems Summit of the UN is billed as contributing to the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. But many civil society organizations and mass movements have been very critical of this Food Systems Summit of the UN due to the obvious corporate capture and corporate interests that are dominating the process, thus may be likely the outcomes. One of the most devastating policies that destroy food systems in Asia is trade and investment liberalization. With its bias towards corporate monopoly capital to supposedly achieve the SDGs. Do you really think the Food Systems Summit will not perpetuate this new liberal policy? Already many regimes in Asia are using the COVID-19 pandemic to further restructure food and agriculture along new liberal lines to entice more foreign capital. That is why many civil society organizations and people's movements are coming together to organize their Global People's Summit for a just, equitable, healthy, sustainable systems. So again, a very warm welcome to this special episode of Peasants Rise Up broadcast series. And now let us hear from our co-host, Christina Sayson. What do we have in store for you in lead up to World Localization Day, this special episode? Over to you, Christina.
Thank you so much, Bobby. So as part of this month-long event, we're holding this special episode of #Peasants Rise Up broadcast. And we're going to be featuring a lot of really interesting and wonderful people. One of them is Asra Saeed, Chair of the Asia Pacific Research Network, or APRN. Chennai Poguri, Chair of the Asian Peasant Coalition. Arnold Padilla, Coordinator of PAN-AP's Food Sovereignty Program, which is also, by the way, the program behind the No Food, No Life campaign. And Kurniawan Sabar, Director of the Institute for National and Democracy Studies. Now, these speakers will be talking about what localization means to them, and we will also be talking about how liberalization policies have devastated domestic food and agriculture in Asia. And we will focus on specific policy recommendations that will reverse liberalization, advance food sovereignty, and pave the way to a truly radical transformation of food systems. So to introduce themselves, I'd love for us to start with Asra. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you so much, Christina. I'm Asra Saeed, the chair for Asia Pacific Research Network, and I am also part of the International League of People's Struggle. Thank you. I'm based in Pakistan, Karachi.
Thank you, Asra. And also, I forgot, and I truly apologize to Ma'am Rosario Bella Guzman, who is Director of Ibon Foundation here in the Philippines, an international foundation focused on research. And because of that, speaking of which, Ma'am Rosby, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, Bobby and everyone. I'm Rosby Guzman. I'm the head of research of the institution called Ibon Foundation that's based in the Philippines.
Thank you so much. Sir Chanaya, could you please introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah. Good afternoon to Bobby and Christina. I'm Chennaya, Chair of Asian Peasant Coalition, and also General Secretary of Andhra Pradesh Vyavasaya Vittadar Union. It is a state-level federation of agriculture workers, fisher folk, and indigenous people. I'm also National Chairperson of National Agriculture Workers Forum in India, and many other hats. As a part of this group, I am also part of no 1080 campaigns on no land, no life, and other things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chanaya. And now let's go to Wawan. Um, could you please introduce yourself very briefly? Sir Wawan? Okay, he seems to be having some technical difficulties. Let's go to Sir Arnold Padilla. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Chris. Hi to you and Bobby, and good day to everyone joining us for this special episode. I'm Arnold. I'm the coordinator of the Food Sovereignty Program of PAN-AP and coordinating the No Land, No Life campaign, regional campaign against land grabbing and a campaign to oppose the human rights violations that are related to this land grabs.
Thank you so much, Sir Arnold. So we're just waiting for Sir Wawan. I think he is are you able to come online, Wawan? Okay. I think he's having a few problems with his internet connection, but uh, just so that we can get the ball rolling and Wawan can introduce himself when he can come back online. Um, Bobby, would you like to start with our first segment?
Yes, thank you, Chris. And so let's begin. And I look forward to hearing from Azra. Let's begin from Azra. Azra, can you please explain to us what is liberalization and why is it a big issue in terms of the people's food security and food sovereignty? Over to you, Azra.
Thank you so much, Vivan. Thank you so much, Bobby. When you talk about liberalization, liberalization is actually the it's a very tame name for political subjugation, for a recolonization of the world, which actually never really came out of colonization, only the tools changed. And so liberalization is very much a form of ensuring that the semi-colonial countries, the countries which are gripped into an international trade regime, they are forced to, on one hand, export their food products and many other, everything that they produce. But we will speak particularly on food and agriculture here. So liberalization basically means that every corporation, all of these mega, humongous transnational corporations are allowed to come into our lands and with their finished products, as well as have control over whatever we produce as raw materials, and then also take out what we produce back to their countries, create it into very expensive products, and then they bring it back into our countries. So we lose when we send out our products because it is very cheap when they buy our commodities from us, and we lose when they bring in their finished products, which are very, very expensive. Now, in terms of liberalization, what I would really like to talk about, apart from this very brief um, understanding of what liberalization is basically hinged to what we call the structural adjustment policies, the neoliberal policies. And there are three tiers to that, which is privatization, deregulation, and trade liberalization. I think the biggest change that happened in the 60s, and I will not go into that, when the Green Revolution policies were created and um, forced onto us. I will just very briefly read something which Hubert Humphrey, a one-time US Vice President, had said. He said, quote, "I have heard that people may become dependent on us for food. I know that was not supposed to be good news. To me, that was good news because before people can do anything, they have got to eat. And if you are looking for a way to get people to lean on you and to be dependent on you, it seems to me that food dependence would be terrific. So this is the philosophy of liberalization, and this was kind of uh, it was thrust on the third world countries, on the so-called developing countries, with the formation of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization is made up of many horrendous agreements. Some of them are TRIPS agreement, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade. But one of the most critical are agreement on agriculture. So the TRIPS agreement and agreement on agriculture combined are a death knell to the small farmers, to the landless farmers of Asia. Um, so I will just briefly talk about what the agreement on agriculture is, because that is how trade liberalization was thrust on us in the 1990s with the formation of the WTO in 1995. AOA, Agreement on Agriculture, is based on 3 clauses. And I don't want to talk about specific clauses, but I will give you the heart of those 3 clauses. Number one, they made sure the transnational corporations who were responsible for the formation of the WTO, they made sure that we in the semi-colonial countries, which they very nicely call us the developing countries, they made sure that our domestic subsidy that we provide to our small farmers, that our governments that provide domestic subsidy to the farmers to grow food for the masses. Our farmers still make up the bulk of our nations, whether it is India or whether it is Vietnam or it is Philippines or Pakistan, that the government will not provide any subsidy to the farmers. So that was number one of the cutting down of domestic subsidy. They created a baseline, a very artificial baseline based on which we had to bring down our subsidy. The second point was that we had to decrease the import barriers that we created uh, for guarding the food safety, the livelihoods of our farmers, food security. All of that was taken away with the WTO, and the what we call as uh, I forget now. Anyway, what happened was that they made us bring down the tariffs on bringing in exports from these very developed, very imperialist countries of the United States, of the European countries, the G7 countries. And so, in essence, we were forced to allow them to come in and access our markets. Yes, it's called access to market. And so, uh, so the twin policies of taking away subsidy from our farmers and for corporations such as Monsanto, Nestle, Cargill, Syngenta, all of them are responsible for what has happened in terms of trade liberalization through the 1990s. And then I also need to just bring it up to the current era and talk about the formation of the second imperialist bloc through China, which has opened the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. And so right now we are seeing a different world in which we have 2 huge blocs, the Americans with the G7 countries and the Chinese on the other side. And there is a um, there's a huge fight for our resources, for our lands, for our markets. And so I will basically stop here because I'm sure other people also have to say other things. And I will bring this issue up later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Azra. It was very important for all of us to perhaps go a deeper dive on understanding more about liberalization. And thanks a lot for linking it with so many processes our governments are part of, like WTO and others. So moving on to forward, and let us know more about how food liberalization policies are implemented in Asian countries. So let's we have Rosario Bella amongst us, and as well as Kurnia Vavan. So maybe it would be great for Rosario and Vavan to share how these food liberalization policies are being implemented in Indonesia and Philippines, respectively. So can we begin with you, Rosario? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Bobby. maybe I just like to add to what Azra said when the Philippines started implementing the agreement on agriculture. We had the basic food stuff being subjected to the minimum access volume, which means that we had to import a minimum access, even if we really don't need um, those imports, even if we could produce them. So that started the entire liberalization principle in food and agriculture. But let me answer your question. In the beginning, as Asra already said, these are parts of the structural adjustment programs imposed on us. So it's not as though our government had its own mind. It followed the dictates of the multilateral institutions and the financial institutions, because the Philippines, for instance, was one of the most heavily indebted countries in the 1980s. So we had to go through those structural adjustment programs. But anyway, having said that, after the WTO, which happened in 1995, where the Philippines was so really obedient to the dictates of the agreement on agriculture, we gave up everything, except that, of course, our farmers had to stop the tarification or the inclusion of rice, our staple, into lowering tariffs and even to tarify, to turn our quantitative restrictions to tariffs. So we were able to hold that off for a long time. But after that, in 1997, our government is quite methodical in liberalizing food and agriculture. Actually, since the WTO, it signed into law what we call the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act, or AFMA, which was supported by the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. This set the stage for the promotion of high value crops and high input varieties, the reduction of land devoted to food crops from, let's say, 5 million for rice and corn to just 3.1 million hectares, the further liberalization of importation of agricultural machinery and technology, inputs and seeds, and of course the clipping of powers of the state food authority. So you see, it's really comprehensive. We were open to technology, to imported inputs, but at the same time, the government has deregulated, which is part of liberalization, deregulated its role in marketing, in trading, or even in production support, which the AOA prohibits: no production support, no export support, no quantitative restrictions, and everything liberalized. So the country was told to gun for agricultural exports earnings by shifting now to high value crops instead of increasing production for local food consumption. And then the succeeding years, the Philippine government changed the direction of development planning by inserting market-oriented land reform as principle and deleting food self-sufficiency as aspiration in the Philippine Development Plan document. The World Bank would renew and establish its long-term funding for Philippine agriculture, supporting market-oriented land reform program and supporting simply food security but not food self-sufficiency in its program called the Philippine Rural Development Plan. So all these would complement imports liberalization under the WTO AOA. The impact on local food security has been tremendous, and I think that's something that all of us in this panel and in this forum can imagine already. Self-sufficiency has eroded, especially with products that the country can otherwise produce sufficiently. So we are now into this import dependence. As Azra has said, is really very powerful tool for those who are ramming down our throats, literally, food imports. I guess that's from the Philippine perspective.
Thanks a lot, Rosario. And so true. Even in our country, we see this moving away from self-sufficiency and more dependence on how, as the liberalization and globalization policies deepen their impact on our local economies. So can we have Vavan now? Vavan, can you please share us how food liberalization policies are being implemented in Indonesia and how they are impacting local food security? And perhaps if you're online, let's hear your introduction as well. Bhavan? Are you there, Bhavan? Perhaps we will get back to Bhavan later on. We can move ahead now, and uh, okay, can I go back to you, Azra? Uh, can you please let us know, like recently, what are the major global or regional developments in today's context that continue to push liberalization forward at the expense of domestic production?
Thank you, Bobby. As I mentioned earlier, the world since 20 in the let's say after 2013, and I mentioned 2013 specifically because of the launching of the Belt and Road Initiative by China, which currently has more than it's going to target more than 90 countries across the world. It is going to join continents from Asia to Africa to Europe and even Latin America. It aims to reach, and so we have the BRI, which is of humongous importance in terms of people's livelihood, in terms of how do we attain food sovereignty, and how do we actually resist this extreme initiative. Not It's not an initiative, it is really um, an eye to controlling our lands once again. It is very much a matter of ensuring that uh, they these imperialist countries like China and the US and others in the G7 bloc have constant access and control over our resources, and of those genetic resources are very, very critical. So the backdrop of RCEP, of BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, or another regional agreement within Asia, which is called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It has about the concept behind these RCEP, BRI, or the WTO is the same. It is to ensure that they have control over three aspects. One is markets, second is labor, and the third are commodities, raw material. So that is the basic thrust. What they have included in all of these, RCEP continues to follow the pattern of WTO. It is now an agreement between about 10 Southeast Asian countries and five others. These include Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, and then some of the big countries are China, Australia, South Korea, Japan, and New Zealand. Until recently, India was one of them, and then at the United States pressurization, India has opted to stay out of RCEP. Also, there were huge demonstrations from the farmers themselves inside India that were refusing to liberalize their agriculture system. So it's not only the pull of the United States, but it's also the extreme, thankfully, the extreme resistance put up by the farmers themselves. And now we see a similar tussle happening between Australia and India. That the Australians are asking for a free trade agreement with India, and the farmers in India are resisting. So when we talk about these huge regional trade blocs or the bilaterals or the free trade agreements, I think the two most critical right now is the RCEP for sure, and then of course the BRI, which is not just a regional trade; it is a global trade agreement. I will for a moment just focus on a BRI. What does it mean for a country like Pakistan? A flagship agreement within the RCEP is called CPEC, which is China Pakistan Economic Corridor. And what does it mean? It really means that the Chinese have basically now control of the entire country. They have created massive infrastructure projects, all cutting through farmers' lands. And so, on one hand, we are losing land, very, very fertile land, for growing food for the people. And on the other hand, the food that we grow is now going into the hands of the Chinese. Um, Connecting this to, let's say, RCEP, what does it mean? Pakistan is not part of RCEP, but Pakistan is part of CPEC. and China has complete control over Pakistan's economy. Now, when we have countries like Australia and New Zealand and Japan sitting next to countries like Pakistan or Philippines or Indonesia, what does it mean for the people? It's an extremely unequal uh, agreement. It's an extremely unequal economic partnership. And these countries, on one hand, produce massive amounts of meat and milk. These two components are very critical for people's sovereignty, for people's food security. When they produce, they will shove everything into our markets and take away our farmers' ability to produce, because we cannot compare the costs of production which these countries have, because they have huge domestic subsidies for their farmers, and we have none. And we have no bartering. Right now, the Americans are in Pakistan saying we want a military base in Pakistan. And they're saying we will give you some measure of relief in the bilateral agreement, a SAP agreement with IMF. So you see, they use other areas of control to come into our countries and use political and military control to take over our lands, over the the democratic rights of the people are extremely eroded. Chinese methods of working with people is well known. Even much more well known is how the Americans function in our countries. They talk about human rights, but they're the very first to take away human rights, people's rights away from the people. So these agreements really are not only meant to take away food and agriculture production from us, they will take away our entire sovereignty as people. Um, in Pakistan, we have, for instance, an, an agreement called the Sanitary Phytosanitary Agreement, which is part of the WTO. That, that allows these corporations to lower standards or create international standards of so-called food safety in terms of plant material and animal material. Now, they will use those international standards to block any form of government protection which is given to our farmers or to our dairy sector or to our, especially the women, because the women are the major caretakers, custodians of livestock in countries like India and Pakistan. So it's I think it's very critical to look at them as a collective set of agreements, whether it is RCEP, whether it is BRI, whether it is WTO, and it should, for us, for the people, it should really be looked as a block, a huge, big cement block, which they are creating around us, like they have done in Palestine. In Palestine, it is a physical wall that they have created around the people. For us, the wall is very much um, is invisible, but the block is, but that block is there. They are putting us into occupied territories, and we have to live our lives as occupied people if we don't stand up and resist. So I think maybe I will not talk about more about RCEP or BRI in detail, but I think it is very important to know that the WTO was the precursor of very, very anti-people, anti-farmer, anti-women agreements. The intellectual property rights agreement is horrendous. It takes away farmers' rights to save seeds. That agreement, TRIPS Plus, is the name of the game with all the later regional free trade agreements, and they copy. So the baseline is in international trade that you cannot go less than the WTO. That is why I think a focus of, of organizations like us, of people's resistances like us, is to maintain that WTO has to be dismantled. WTO has to be taken down because WTO has agreements which have teeth, which have legal mechanisms to be implemented in our countries. And whether we have RCEP, or we have BRI, or we have other free trade agreements which are coming into our countries, WTO remains the base. And so uh, I think the most critical remain agreement on agriculture, TRIPS, General Agreement on Trades and Services, and SPS now. In the 90s, SPS was not being discussed. But now in 2020, in many of our countries, SPS has become the sanitary and phytosanitary measures and technical barriers to trade, these are 2TBT and SPS within the WTO, have now taken on huge importance because now from the from the crops, now they are coming into the milk and dairy sector, into the meat sector, the livestock sector. The intellectual property rights agreement ensures control over genetic material, and the SPS and TBT create mechanisms where we cannot protect our genetic material. I can tell you that women in the villages of Pakistan, they keep their animals out on the, we call them kacha roads. They are unpaved, just just villages with no pavements. They will keep their animals out on the streets in front of their homes. And the government of Pakistan has been coming around telling these women, you cannot keep your animals here. This is creating a sanitary problem for everybody, where they don't have land, they are landless. Where do they keep their animals? So they are creating these very, very artificial mechanisms of taking control away from keeping our animals with us. These are genetic resources. These are old lines of breeds of critical importance to us. But the Americans, the Chinese, do not want us to save our animals the same way they did not want us to save our seeds, so that they have control over genetic resources. It seems such a mild regulation. Please clean up your streets. Please don't keep your animals out on the streets. Well, they have no other space. Tomorrow, if there is a regulation, take away your animals, our genetic resources are gone. So it pays us to be very complex in how we analyze these agreements. We should not do them. We should not be reductionist in looking at these agreements one by one. Of course, we need to know them one by one, but we need to bring an analysis which encompasses all these agreements together in a fight for food sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azra. Very, very, very powerful intervention indeed. And thanks a lot for mentioning not only global and regional developments which are happening around, which are pushing liberalization and affecting domestic food sovereignty, but also like things which are happening, like for example, BRI and the China Pakistan economic corridor. Very, very important. But Rosario, can we please listen from you? If you have anything to add here on how major global or regional developments are pushing liberalization from perspective and
Well,
impacting food supply
yes.
domestic.
Um,
Go ahead,
right.
please.
Okay. I've already mentioned about the exemption and moratorium we had on rice before, which we were able to extend twice due to farmers' demands, right? Um, the, a- as regards initiatives to further liberalize food and agriculture, which I can connect to what is happening regionally and globally. Locally, that moratorium has been lifted already, as I mentioned earlier, and this is under the Duterte administration, where we experienced rice tariffication, and now with the direction of further lowering tariffs on rice. I said already that rice is a staple, so that kind of set the precedent for other basic food stuff. At this point, the government is lowering also the minimum access volume, as well as the in quota and out quota tariffs for pork, which is when it comes to meat. Pork is also one of our staple meats along with chicken. So it is easy it is easy how to see now how other products may follow. So that's on the imports liberalization side. But I'd like to focus on another um, major policy, I should say, or major change that happened in just the recent weeks, where our government pushed for changing the charter, or what we call here charter change, or chacha, to open up lands of the public domain, natural resources, and agricultural lands to foreign ownership and exploitation. And this also goes for public utilities education, sports and culture, and mass media and advertising. It's as though the last frontiers of for investment liberalization have been really encroached upon by changing our very own constitution. We need to appreciate Chacha in the context of the Duterte administration's grandiose infrastructure program, which I would like to connect to what Azra is saying, the Belt and Road Initiative. You see, the Philippines is not a darling in the BRI. We were actually just sitting in for about 2 to 3 meetings already, while our president kept on going to China. We are not actually a formal member. Well, not from the beginning, because maybe we're not just attractive enough for Chinese investments or Chinese construction or infrastructure investment. But somehow, if you will look at the Philippines in the map, you will see that it has a unique role in pushing for China's aggression through the BRI. And that is because it is right there in the center of the Pacific Ocean, the Asia Pacific, where it can have a, what do you call this, a pivotal role in geopolitics, as well as in the um, the economic rivalry that Azra has already described between the US and China, and now really dragging India and Australia into that kind of aggression, or kind of it's not yet aggression on the part of China, if you may say that, but the Philippines is the only willing Asian country in the South China Sea for China to occupy its territories, its territorial waters, and even its islands, and allow China to build construction and other structures on our territories. And that is in exchange of the infrastructure investment. Okay, I'm just putting in context why we have, as a centerpiece program, why our government is focusing on the infrastructure program. That is basically to attract foreign investments in infrastructure, and mostly Chinese and Japanese investments, and at the same time building the infrastructure that caters to foreign investment. So the projects are unnecessary for real economic development, and or irrelevant even as we struggle to cope with this pandemic. These are airports, rail, subway. At a time of COVID-19, these are the things we don't need anymore, or they are irrelevant. But the government has to push for this, because it shows the investors that yes, we're ready to receive these projects, and even to host your projects. We're ready for your technology, for the glut of construction materials coming from China, for the glut of steel. There is a steel glut, petroleum products glut, and even grains, even food glut. So the Philippines just opens up to those uh, oversupply or overproduction. But when you look now at the infrastructure program, and a charter change that opens up land, not just for foreign ownership and exploitation, but for land speculation, it undoubtedly enriches now not only the foreign construction corporations, but also our oligarchs, the domestic elite, whose sources of wealth have been real estate development and land speculation, among others. I am mentioning this to go back to food sovereignty. It practically tramples upon the very basic resource that our farmers should have access to, in order to assert their right to produce food and their right to food. And there are already many cases where it is prime agricultural land, but the farmers have to be driven away because um, um, a train or some construction is happening, or even just real estate development is happening on that land. And it has really resulted in massive land grabbing. That is one of the initiatives that we can connect to, for example, what is happening regionally. And well, at this point, I stop because I haven't even talked about how the US also is pressuring our government take the side of the U.S. in this kind of race again to revive their own economies at the expense of Asian and other third world economies.
Thank you, Rosario, again. Absolutely very important that rich countries are definitely exploiting us to revive their own economies. That this is a historical. So thanks again, Rosario. Okay, do we have Vavan? Vavan, can you please come online? You unmute. Let's check if we can. We're lucky enough to get Vavan, and then we'll get to hear more from Indonesia. Okay, hello, welcome,
Bobby?
Vavan. Yes.
No, this is Arnold. I just got a message from Wawan. It seems that there's a blackout in their area, and
all
so
right.
there's no internet. But he's trying to go back to the room.
All right. Okay. Fine. So moving ahead,
Maybe we can proceed.
over to the co-host Christina Sayson. Christina, Chris.
Hi, thank you, Bobby. So now we're going to be talking about food sovereignty, localization, and food systems transformation. And I'd love to ask Arnold, um, exactly how does food sovereignty and localization come together? How is it a response to liberalization? Because as we've heard, liberalization has all of these horrible knockdown effects, and just it it has um, directly affected the food security of people in different countries in the post-colonial world. And there is a clear push for food sovereignty. And what does that mean in relation to localization? Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So, as described by Azra and Rose, globalization is the big problem, and to some, the direct solution would be to localize or localization. So the problem is global trade, and then maybe the solution is to localize and do away with international trade altogether. But I think it's important that we clarify that, especially from the perspective of the global South, given our history. You talk about the post-colonial, but actually we really need to go back deep into the history of many Asian countries to understand where we are today and how we should confront the challenge of liberalization and other globalization policies. And, in the process, clarify what to us is localization, and how and why is it counter to liberalization in order to promote our food sovereignty. I think for underdeveloped countries in Asia, which comprise the great majority of the region, localization as a counter to liberalization must be understood, in the context of the historical restructuring or reorientation of domestic agriculture and food production that dates back to the era of colonialism. We have to take this historical perspective, in order to fully grasp the relevance to poor Asian countries of localization of food systems, many of which remain neo-colonies, of the imperialist powers, as described by Rosely in the Philippines, by Azra in Pakistan. Western colonialization deeply and fundamentally restructured the way Asian countries produce food, in order to serve the requirements of the colonial masters. Agricultural and food production was reoriented away from meeting the domestic food security needs of local communities and the overall socio-economic development needs of nations. Colonies were transformed to become sources of cheap raw materials for the industrial needs of the colonizers, as well as for their own food security and food production needs. And at the same time, the colonies became dumping grounds, no, for the surplus food and agricultural production of the colonizers, further destroying in a systematic manner the domestic food and agriculture sectors of many Asian countries. A key aspect of this process was land and resource grabbing, wherein peasants and other small food producers were dispossessed of ownership and control over their means of production. And these were taken over by the colonialists and their allies from the local elite, like the big landlords and what we call the compradors, or essentially that part of the local elite who are acting as local agents of foreign powers. Now, hundreds of years have passed, you know, and but these colonial relations, as described by Azra, as described by Rosie, essentially remain between the rich and powerful countries on one end and the poor and neo-colonial countries on the other. The neoliberal globalization of the past 4 decades, including the liberalization of food and agriculture, further built on such lopsided relations with transnational corporations, or what we call the TNCs, at the front and center of the onslaught against domestic food and agricultural production today. The TNCs and their network of local landlords and compradors further deepened their monopoly control over land and resources and how food is produced and for whom, and the global market and the global trade. Uh, and the global market and international trade, where these TNCs and their compradors profit massively, became the topmost priority, you know, for food and agricultural production, especially in this era, the current era of neoliberalism, at the great expense of domestic food security of many nations, and especially the poor countries. And this process aggravated, worsened the permanent crisis in the neo-colonies and characterized by the ever worsening hunger and poverty of the people, including the landless peasants who directly produce food. For example, the production of staple food like rice, the production of vegetables and other food crops to meet domestic requirements were further undermined as production became more and more oriented toward what is profitable for the transnational corporations in the context of global market and trade. So when we say localization from the perspective of the former colonies and the modern neo-colonies in Asia today, I think more than anything else, it means challenging and ending the historical and current domination of colonial and imperialist powers in the food and agriculture sector. I think this is the only meaningful way that food and agricultural production uh, can be localized, no, or meaning be oriented back toward meeting its actually its original purpose, no, of securing the domestic food security needs of the people, and away from the big global market obsession of neoliberalism and the profit-driven agenda of TNCs and their compradors. And to make this kind of localization possible, it is necessary to end the monopoly control that TNCs and the local elite have over land and agricultural resources, which provides the material basis for their um, what we call unrestrained control on how and for whom food should be produced. Meaning to say, genuine agrarian reform and rural development uh, uh, is therefore necessary, you know, if we want to talk about localization of food systems. And this also means that localization does not simply involve connecting the farmers or food producers directly to the market at the local or community levels, no? Such as what we see for example, through farmers markets or community-supported agriculture. Without structural changes in the social and production relations between farmers, traders, and landlords, and without the necessary policy reforms and programs at the national level. No, because you just imagine how could community-led initiatives, you have farmers markets, community-supported uh, agriculture as community-led initiatives. But how can these things prosper amid a predominant system wherein the global food supply chain is monopolized, the global food supply chain up to the national and local level is monopolized by a handful of TNCs and local elite? No? How can local farm production be advanced and strengthened to meet the needs of the community when the prevailing policy environment is neoliberal restructuring of agricultural production at the expense of food security and the livelihoods of the farmers? And in the case, for example, of many neo-colonial and backward countries in Asia, like the Philippines, Indonesia, Pakistan, how can the great majority of farmers here even participate in such community partnerships or food localization movements when they are dispossessed of lands to till and are deprived of the capacity to produce food? Now, in other words, most important is that localization should mean that at the national level, there is a comprehensive program where farmers have individual or collective ownership and control over land and resources, and where local food production for domestic consumption is supported or encouraged through state subsidies, price support, and protection from unnecessary foreign competition, among others. And with all these things firmly in place, other supportive programs can be more easily introduced, and widely promoted, such as institutionalizing agroecological methods of farming, as opposed to the chemical-heavy, export-oriented corporate farming. And I think this also addresses the question I saw in the chat: how can biodiverse systems can be promoted? Does international trade hamper it? Well, uh, trade per se, international trade per se is not the problem for agroecology to flourish. The problem, as I've mentioned earlier, is that this international trade uh, is heavily dominated by profit-seeking TNCs who have no concern whatsoever about the environment and would produce food in whatever way they can in the most profitable way they can. And given this situation, biodiverse agricultural systems will not really thrive.
Thank you so
So
much,
yeah,
Arnold. So I just saw that Wawan was able to join us already. Wawan, are you able to speak?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Okay.
great. Yay. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for
sorry.
joining us. I'm sorry that there's a blackout in your area.
Yeah.
Uh, could
Sorry.
you very briefly just let us know how liberalization has affected Indonesia and how localization and food sovereignty movements can support, in line with what Arnold was talking about food sovereignty and agrobiodiversity, and how those things can be an effective counter to liberalization? Perhaps you can also expand on that.
Okay. So, liberalization in Indonesia is um, quite. It is very long history and happened in Indonesia. So, for example, food and agricultural liberalizations is actually implemented in Indonesia since the people forced to cultivate the fruit crops commodities since the colonialism era in Indonesia, and it is getting more intensifying and increased during the Green Revolution era in 1970s that actually promote and implemented by the imperialist agenda through the World Bank and other financial institutions promote this kinds of programs. So the green revolutions have impacted the food and agricultural, especially on how to liberalize the food and agricultural system in Indonesia. So during that time, our agricultural is really expanded under the driven of the corporate and imperialist agenda. So based on that program until today, our food and agricultural sector is actually planned and implemented to serve the biggest interest of the corporate of the big corporations here in Indonesia that actually connected directly to the market of capitalists. So basically, the liberalization here in Indonesia is practically implemented based on the land monopoly and land grabbing system, because food and agricultural crops that being built is practically use the big scale of land. It is implemented in the like paddy and other food crops sectors, and based on the program of the state, most of the food and agricultural products is served to serve the export oriented of the state program. And otherwise, during this period, during this agenda, now the agricultural also being implemented directly by the corporate agenda. The farmers or the peasants now forced to also cultivate the food crops commodity, but it is not for the domestic interest. While at the same time, our needs for staple food and other food needs is actually fulfilled by the import product of agricultural and food products, and it is not only implemented in the agricultural but also in the livestock sector and also in the fisheries. Why? Because all of the production is actually driven by the corporate interest that monopolies all of the inputs of agriculture, inputs of tools and technology of for the food and agricultural sector, including the fisheries and also for the livestock. For example, for agricultural input or for food for the fish in the fishery sectors is totally fulfilled by the import production or the product of the corporates, because we don't have any industrial that can produce that kinds of needs, and it is totally produced by the imperialist corporate like Syngenta, like Bayer, Monsanto, and even other big landlord corporation like Sinarmas and also Cargill to fulfill all of the agricultural input and for the fisheries. And it is totally created the monopoly not only in the process of fulfill the input for agriculture, but also to monopoly the product and the price of the food commodities. And now it is still continuing by the facilitations of regulation and policies of the state. Recently, we have some program that also more expanded or more facilitate the liberalization uh, agenda. Like, for example, one is we have a partnership of Indonesia agriculture or Peace Agro that driven directly by the Syngenta, Bayern, Smart or Sinarmas, Nestle, and Unilever. And also we have a food estate project that actually implemented by the Jokowi in the Jokowi administration to expand more and more uh, big scales of plantations. And also we have that the government have issued the new law, we call it omnibus law, that really serve the interest of the corporation in the food and agriculture. So based on this situation, now the people's movement, like uh, peasant movement, labor movement, youth movement, now still increasing our struggle to really demand the and mobilize the people to demand to realize the genuine agrarian reform and to stop the land monopoly and land grabbing, as well as to help the people to practically implement the collective land agriculture in the food sectors that is actually practiced collectively by the peasant in the in the village uh, to survive or to directly vis-a-vis with the agricultural and food productions of the big corporations here in Indonesia. While at the same times we also encourage more or expand more the campaign, uh, like in the both in the rural and in the urban area, to really demand and to voice out the aspirations of peasant and peoples to realize the genuine agrarian reform and to build the national industrializations. I think that's all for now.
Thank you so much, Wawan. Actually, in line with the discussion on genuine agrarian reform, I'd love to ask Chinaya um, about genuine agrarian reform and how land to the tiller and dismantling of monopolies can help us counter food liberalization, and what the role of small farmers and other small food producers are in addressing food security needs of people of local communities.
Thank you, Christina. It is really very well presented. Preceding presentations gives me less to speak as it has been covered widely. So, taking from where Wawan has stopped, we still in Asia, 65% of the people depends on agriculture. Despite of the so-called colonialism, and then thereafter the urbanization and structural adjustment programs, and then globalization, corporate driven, everything has been bulldozed on the lives of the people, but still 60%, 65% of the people in majority countries in Asia are dependent on agriculture. This need to take note very seriously. Means that these 65% of the people are never dependent on the so-called democratic, undemocratic governments that are there, and they survive on their own needs, despite of the kind of difficulties that has been pushed upon them. So this, if we see this as a kind of element that need to be strengthened, the localization, then we have to see that land, water and forest should be on whose hands. The basic elements of this natural capital, it's not a word to use like that, but in today's context, I don't mind using the natural capital should be in the hands of the people who have been nurturing the nature to develop and then develop the civilization of a food and culture in the world, particularly in Asian country. Despite of all these problems, the land and agriculture are the prime important factors to provide food not only for the producers and also to the global citizens. If Asians and Africans don't produce the food, what will happen to the global hunger? So today, all these things has been undermined. The land should be in the hands of the people who have been developing the land, agriculture, inventing agriculture, and creating the world of food by nature. So that has been in serious threat because of the introduction of the so-called green to green revolutions that the governments has been pressing upon it, giving a lot of subsidies to the corporates, industrial houses, and also MNCs to grab whatever the local resources are there. So enough is enough. They have been looted our economies and they have been dismantled our food systems and they have been spoiled our soils. But it is the time for the peasant struggles to see that how do we take this further. And the land reforms, genuine land reforms is the day of the need, because we have seen particularly in a country, South Asian countries, in the name of the special economic zones, the agricultural lands are taken. In the name of export processing zones, the sea coast lands has been taken for the favor of the corporates, and also forests has been mining, and then deforestation has been taking place, displacing the forest dwellers. In the sense in India and South Asia, it is we can say indigenous people have been forcefully displaced in the name of the so-called development, which is the anti-development of the people. So what I mean to say here is the governments have to look back, that they have the basic responsibility to see that to respect the inalienable rights of the people over the land, water and forest who produce the food for the world and also to themselves. So if they take as an important element, then they should come down to the genuine agrarian reforms, which on the lines that the peasant struggles has been taking place in Asia and different corners, fighting for the land rights as against the MNCs grabbing the lands. So it is in that context, there is a great need for people to look into the, see that the government should stop to give subsidies to the MNCs as against the people. In the sense, genuine agrarian reform means that they should give and invest on the lands, on the agriculture, and the technology that the people know, respect them, and then use the people's technology for the food production and production for the people, not only to the locals and also to the people in the country, as against giving the license to the MNCs and then industrial houses in country and outside. So if we take that as a kind of thing, we have to respect the struggles of farmer struggles in India, how they have been exposing the neoliberal policies of the Indian government, which is it is really in tune working for the corporate control, taking control over the agriculture economy. This is in that kind of context, we feel that we have to restore the local food production in the hands of the local people, and the government should give the subsidies and then respect the food production zones in the areas and stop the giving land to the corporates, and provide see that the land should be given in the hands of the poor farmers and peasants. It is not that the government is giving genuinely, it is an inalienable right of these people to hold the rights over the land, forest and water. So they should not interfere. If they don't do anything much, they should not interfere in these manners, and then help the real people who cultivate the land should get the land. And this has been, the struggles has been going on in South Asia and also many other countries in Asia which need to be respected, and then stop the damage of the kind of projects that has been taking up in India and other countries in the name of the development. To keep up and restore these kind of things, there are enough of legislations in some of these Asian countries. And soon after the so-called colonial end of the colonial era, and there were some reform legislations has come, but with a lot of loopholes. But wherever people have been fighting for those kind of restoration of the rights, there is a possibility. Like in India, we have been fighting for the rights over the forest by the indigenous people, and which we got the law to ensure the inalienable right of the forest. But the government has been, at one hand, they have given the law, at the other hand, they are inviting the MNCs to come and take the forest for mining and big construction of the big dams, and also taking up all sorts of forest deforestation activities. Same way, the coastal corridor of industries has been dumping as against the law of our country, and then these industries are coming and dumping the effluation to the forest sea, and then fisher folk whose main livelihood resource is the fish has been depleting because of this kind of toxics which has been polluting our water. Same way as the lands, as our friend said, that the so-called revolutions that in favor of the corporates, which has come from 60s onwards in the countries, have been spoiled our lands, and it is the time that we should restore the biodiversity based agriculture, which is being still survived despite of all these kind of damages done by that. And it is the responsibility of the governments to respect the people's struggles, to see that they protect the land, water and forest, so that the food needs of the countries has been taken care by the people, not by the MNCs. Thanks for the time being.
Thank you so very much, Chanaya, sir. Just to kind of, this is such an important subject matter, especially land to the tiller, land to the people, because when people take care of land, they also take care of biodiversity. They take care of the sheer richness of the ecologies of their homes. And in line with that, I would love to ask Arnold about how this connects with food sovereignty, not just food security. Arnold?
Yes, thanks, Chris. And I couldn't agree more with what Chenaya said about genuine agrarian reform, because any localization movement becomes hollow without genuine agrarian reform and rural development, without addressing the historical, social injustices that our peasants and small food producers have been suffering. And all these principles on what should guide localization are actually encapsulated in what we call food sovereignty. Food sovereignty as a framework is very useful for neo-colonial countries like us in Asia that want to embrace localization to counter and reverse liberalization. Food sovereignty refers to the right of peoples, communities, and countries to determine their own production systems, which are ecologically, socially, economically, and culturally appropriate to their unique circumstances. And it is different from food security, which neoliberalism actually distorted to mean as the simple availability of food, regardless of where the food was produced. Even if a country is heavily import dependent on food and could no longer produce its own food, where before it can, but because of the neoliberal restructuring, its agriculture and food production sectors have been heavily devastated. It is different from food security, which neoliberalism distorted to mean as long as food is available, regardless of how that food was produced, even if it is chemical heavy and destructive to the ecosystems, and in a way, not neoliberalism justified uh, liberalization and destruction of ecosystems in the pretext of securing of ensuring food security. And food sovereignty is challenging that. And it is the power of the people and the communities and the countries not to assert and realize the right to food and the right to produce food, and it is the right of communities and nations to fight the power of corporations and other forces that destroy the people's food production systems and deny them food and life. And therefore, at the heart of food sovereignty should be a strong mass movement of farmers and small food producers, no? Of workers and consumers, and all their advocates, no? The scientists, the technologists, the human rights advocates. No? It's a broad people's movement that will push for the policies and programs to dismantle the monopoly control of transnational corporations and landlords over land and resources, and to reorient and radically transform food systems toward addressing the basic needs of the people. I'll end there, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arnold. And thank you to Tanaya and Wawan for their wonderful messages, which are deeply important. So here we heard from Wawan, from Dr. Asra, and from Rosby that liberalization has had horrible effects on local communities, on farmers, on local economies, and national economies, even regional economies, like what's happening here in Southeast Asia, and South Asia, of course. And at the same time, we're seeing, according to Chinaya and to Arnold, uh, a kind of counter force, which is a force that comes directly from the people, from those um, who have a right to the land because they are on the land. They are stewarding the land and caring for the biodiversity of the land and the health of the people. And my dog agrees. And I'd love to hear from Bobby about what our next segment will be regarding these wonderful topics.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. And your last comment reminded me of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi had said, and I will read verbatim, that he said that in reality, the toilers is the owner of what he produces. If the toilers intelligently combine, they will become an irresistible power. And that is really hope that his words come true, although so many decades have passed by and people are resisting. But there is the only hope lies for a better tomorrow, for a sustainable tomorrow, is in people power. And uh, and another hope lies, which is going to be very soon, is the Global People's Summit for a just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable food systems. We will hear more about Global People Summit for a just, equitable, healthy, sustainable food systems. But before we do that, as we know, in this Global People Summit, we might have more about policy reforms, how to reverse these policies on liberalization, how to strengthen domestic food production, and promote food sovereignty. So before we know more about the summit, let us hear from our panelists if what are the particular policy reforms at the national level, at the regional level, at the global level to reverse liberalization, to strengthen domestic food production, and to food sovereignty. Azra, can we begin from you, please? Can we hear from you? Azra Saeed.
Thank you so much, Bobby. I mean, when you say what are the policies in our countries to reverse liberalization, I really searched my mind and I tried to see what are, such nice governments, such people-friendly governments that we have, what have they done? And there's nothing that I can report from Pakistan. I can only report on the policy level. It's further push. It's if they provide subsidy, it is subsidy for cash crops. It is for export crops. which these these imperialist leeching countries want from our soils, from our people. So we have land grab, which is not pro-friendly. We have very rich housing schemes where the people of Karachi have been going and fighting every day for the past week, where powerful land mafia people have taken away land from the poor farmers, and so on and on and on. I think so. We should be just um, we should be realistic. The change is not going to come from our country governments. The change will come from us, from the people. And I feel that the WTO was in many ways a wake-up call. This is not new. As I read, the excerpt which I read from Rupert Humphrey was 1957, where he openly talks about food as a weapon. And Bush, the senior Bush, had talked about food as a weapon. And countless United States trade representatives and government officials have talked about food as a weapon. So we are clear that for us, food and safe and nutritious food is a right and is a critical need of our people. And for them, food is a weapon. So the drawing lines are already clear. And so when I said that WTO was a wake-up call, I think the term food sovereignty has been taken very, very uh, critically, especially thank you to Iban, to Panepi, who have worked on that term and brought out a wealth of strategies or to counter this food imperialism that is happening in parts of our world. And so we have the term food sovereignty, which means first and foremost, the right to food, this right to safe and nutritious, chemically free, pesticide free, toxic free, genetically modified free food for the people. And second, equally important, I don't want to call it second, is control and access over reproductive resources in the hands of the people, and especially the small and landless farmers, all small producers. And that is the policy guideline that we need to fight at every level. And amongst ourselves, amongst the critical actors, the people of our countries, the producers, the consumers, the women, the youth, the students, the academia, everybody. We have to have national platforms fighting for food sovereignty. And I really mean the word fight, because we're talking about land. The corporates want land, the Americans want our land, the Chinese want our land, and we will have to stand up and fight. And we will have to develop many different mechanisms for fighting, from very militant forms of fighting to maybe just growing agroecology, using agroecology, saving our seeds, indigenous seeds, local seeds, going back, taking back our methods of production and our lands of production. So I really have, Bobby, nothing to say what our government is doing, which would promote food sovereignty. It's doing nothing. And we are doing a lot. So I have full faith in the people of Asia and the people of the world, the women of the world. We will stand up and fight, and the governments know, and they're doing the best to prosecute people, to kill people, to victimize people, to criminalize people. It's okay. We are used to it. We have been living in under colonialism and new colonialism, and we have learned to fight, and we know how to fight, and we will fight. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Azraji. And you are so right. The hope lies in the people. And absolutely, that is where the hope lies for a better world. And thanks a lot for mentioning women as the only possible future will be a feminist future, just future. And it's all about solidarity. Chennaiya ji, can we hear from you if you'd like to share some policy reforms at national, regional, or global level to reverse liberalization, to strengthen domestic food production, and promote food sovereignty? Over to you, Chennai.
Bobby, there is no shortcut, as Azra said. There is no shortcut. The governments are not in favor of the people. We all know that. But as we have been talking in the context of this United Nations is planning for summit, and as people summit, we have to throw some demands and some light into the kind of areas that they need to realize, not that they don't know, they don't have the political will, which need to be really highlighted. Is the number one is that the government should stop victimizing the human rights defenders and then land rights activists and then peasant right activists, and then they should stop killings of these peasants. And that should be the one of the major area we need to bring in as a part of our demands. Second one is withdraw all the licenses that has been giving to the corporates to occupy or grab the agricultural lands, and then convert the agriculture lands for food production zones into the corporate agriculture and then commercial agriculture areas. So that has to be stopped now, and which need to be, as Ezra said, that we need to really thrust upon the people's movements, building the people's movements to stop all those kind of intruders. Third one is provide support for peasantry to really uphold and also sustain the food sovereignty zones wherever the people are able to survive without even the support of the government should be supported with respecting to the local technology, and also because the technology which is coming up in a big way in rural area where the agriculture workers and peasants has been losing their lands and agriculture workers are losing their employment. And then fourth one is stop agriculture lands converting into the non-agriculture purposes. So there are some laws in India, state laws, which are very progressive, that agriculture lands cannot be easily converted into non-agriculture purposes. Of course, you know that all those backdoor methods, but at least there is a law which can be fight and then stop such kind of conversions. And some states are still are able to protect. Then stop the entry of the governments and also the MNCs into the domains of the forests where the indigenous people have been protecting the forest and have the right over the forest producers, for which some of the, like in India, we have a law which need to be implemented so that the Forest Rights Act, where the people depending on forest cannot be thrown out or displaced mercilessly. And then what I feel is we also have to see that we have to vacate some of the MNCs which are holding the lands without being properly having licenses. For example, in SEZ, special economic zones, thousands and thousands of acres of land is given to the MNCs in India, but these lands has been kept vacant, violating the SEZ Act itself. So if the corporations don't occupy use the land which is given to them within 3 years, that land should go back to the government. This is the law, but nowhere in India that act has been implemented. People's movements like us, many of us, who have been identifying such packets and then grabbing those land, taking back the land to the people, and we have been cultivating and justifying to the government why we occupied these lands as against the government giving it to the MNCs. So there are some spaces which need to use and then fight it out. And to fight it out, we have to see that the state should respect the law of the country and United Nations human rights, so that UDHR and then within the country there are fundamental rights need to be respected, and then protect the people, not branding them as a terrorists who have been fighting for the land rights and restoring the rights of the people over the land, water, and forests. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chennai. Yeah, so such an important, an array of points on policy reforms, and let's hope that those who are going to decide or convene at the UN Food System Summit, they also hear these points. But of course, we are looking forward to the Global People Summit as well. That's where the real hope lies for us. Rosby, will you like to add something? And Bhavan, I will come back to
Yes, I
you.
think
Yes.
at this point, the most immediate policy reform that we have to demand and fight for is the substantial economic aid and stimulus that our governments must pour in. US, China, and even the European Union governments are pouring in billions of dollars into in order to stimulate their economy, and that is for capitalists' benefit, so that they continue having aggregate demand, um, not exactly to recover the people from the pandemic. But on the other hand, yes, we need that because they're using the pandemic to further liberalize the economy, and using also our situation of not getting what do you call this, not getting any economic aid. But I'd like to draw your attention to what is, a trend, maybe I should say, or what we have observed as a counter current or a counter flow to what our governments, especially in Asia, what Asian governments want to do, or even from for the Philippines, when the Philippines tries to have its charter changed just to attract foreign investments, and that is a statistics brought to us by Global Trade Alert that shows globally protectionist measures implemented worldwide since 2008. There are about 20,000 protectionist measures as against only about almost 9,000 liberalization measures, which means that the trend is actually going towards protectionism. And this includes over 8,000 protectionist measures by G20 members, especially EU countries, US, India, Russia, and China. And these cover trade protection, state subsidies, public procurement, and investment measures. I'm mentioning this because um, while we may have the notion that governments are really towards liberalization, these statistics would show us that the trend is going towards more protectionist measures. And just to mention that Indonesia, for example, has terminated investment treaties with 20 plus countries, including Bulgaria, Cambodia, China, France, Hungary, India, Italy, Laos, Malaysia, Netherlands, Romania, etc. India has terminated investment treaties with 58 countries, South Africa with 13 countries, and even in Latin America, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Bolivia have terminated investment treaties. We're looking also at the trend that since 2016, liberalization deals have been terminated, and or the number of liberalization measures um, is actually declining since 2016, or since the global interest rates have picked up, which means that investors are more looking into their own, into their domestic economies, and not really looking overseas. I'm saying this because my government, for instance, is making doing a counter flow. While the trend is really for protectionism, the Philippines is opening up and even changing its constitution just to attract investments in land acquisition by foreigners, etc., etc. So that minute detail I would like to put forward, although Azra would say which government would really care for protecting, for having protectionist measures, but also to remind us that in the WTO there is a built-in mechanism wherein during a crisis such as the pandemic, for instance, countries can actually reinstitute their tariffs. So I'm saying this as a policy reform. I'm pushing for, we can push and fight for more protectionist measures, but at the same time, we can reinstitute tariffs on foodstuff and agricultural products. We can reverse government deregulation of local production and even marketing and trade. And we can hold our governments accountable for hunger and poverty. And Chanaya has already mentioned we can abrogate not only unjust trade deals, but also agricultural land concessions given to corporations, foreign or local. And to make it as a framework, I think food sovereignty means assertion. It doesn't really happen like just a framework, or it's not just a set of rights. The key word in food sovereignty, it's its assertion. And all these policy reforms will be really nothing if we don't have people's or farmers' movements that will assert for these policy reforms.
Thank you so much, Rosby. We have to assert for our rights of food sovereignty. Totally, absolutely. Vavan, will you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. Okay, in regards to the policy reforms that protect the food sovereignty, I actually have searched so many regulation and policies in Indonesia, but I really wonder that it is really kinds of policy reform that really protect or serve the interest for food sovereignty for the people. Because practically all of these regulations and policies is not serve the interest of the people, especially for right to land, right to food, and as the whole as a food sovereignty interest of the peoples. For example, um, in the Jokowi administrations, they issued a program that they called agrarian reform and agrarian reform and social forestry. So when the people see this policy or this program, the people will wish that because it is talk about the agrarian reform, so it can be benefit for the people interest. But practically, it is not for the people's interest. Even this kinds of program is treating the food sovereignty and the right of the people for land and food, because this kinds of program is actually just to serve the interest of the corporations. The governments also issued project that we call it food security project through the food estate development. So if we refers to the terms of food security, it means that it must be protect the food sovereignty for the people, but practically it is not, because the food security means by the government, it needs to build more and more large scale of plantations that driven by the corporation. So we are wondering that if we have such a good policy reform for now, because the policy reform is uh, is just to benefit the corporation and interest of the imperialists here in Indonesia, for example. And it is I think it is quite similar also, like in the Philippines, India, and other countries in Asia, because the policy reform that being built by the government at one side is just to serve the corporate interest. But in these situations, we also learn much from our history that liberalization in food and agriculture can increase because the failure of the agrarian reform program during the Sukarno era. So based on this historic also, we believe that if we want to build or realize our food sovereignty, our right to land, our right to food is must be based on the genuine agrarian reform program. And there are some national policy that actually want to centralize the food security system or food security policies here in Indonesia need to be reformed immediately. For example, one is we have immediate demand to reform the policy on land, and the second we need the immediate reform on the agricultural law, and the third we need the immediate reform also in the export and import policy, especially for food and agriculture product. And fourth is we need immediate reform for policy to build the industrial for agricultural processing. So I think that's all for for context of Indonesia from our side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bhavan, for sharing these important policy reforms, especially from the context of Indonesia. Thanks again. And we'll come back to you. And meantime, let us move to Arnold. Arnold, can you please tell us, and we all have been waiting more to hear about the Global People's Summit for Just, Equitable, Healthy, and Sustainable Food Systems. Please tell us more about it and how can organizations and movements participate in it. Over to you, Arnold.
Uh, Thank you, Bobby. All the reforms, the policy reforms mentioned by our comrades and friends, actually, they're not just demands on paper. They are actually the content of ongoing, existing mass struggles and people's campaigns. And the Global People's Summit for a Just, Equitable, Healthy, and Sustainable Food Systems hope to build on these strong campaigns and struggles happening on the ground. As a campaign, the People's Summit is a global campaign initiated by international and regional groups that advance the people's food sovereignty and genuine agrarian reform, as well as groups that share these concrete programs for our food systems. It is a counter summit to the UN Food System Summit, initiated not actually by governments, but initiated and heavily controlled by monopoly corporations that dominate global food and agriculture. It will take place, the People's Summit will take place in September, when the UN Food System Summit will also happen alongside the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York. There are no specific dates yet for the actual, for the official Food System Summit. So whenever that event happens, we will also plan the People's Food Systems Summit. The campaign is currently being led by 19 organizations representing global and regional movements of landless peasants and small-scale farmers, agricultural workers, indigenous peoples, women, youth, migrants, and food sovereignty advocates. Both the Asian Peasant Coalition and Pan-Asia Pacific, which are organizing our Peasants Rise Up series, are among the organizers of the People's Summit campaign. And in fact, the Peasants Rise Up series is part of our ongoing efforts to promote the People's Summit and reach out to more groups in Asia. So through the People's Summit, we hope to contribute in the building of a and strengthening of a global movement that will challenge the monopoly control of transnational corporations over food and agriculture. We hope to further strengthen the ongoing campaigns at the national, regional, and global levels against neoliberal globalization, against the hazardous technologies being peddled by transnational companies that harm the people and our planet, such as genetic engineering, agrochemicals, and others. It is a campaign against dubious innovations, such as digitalization of farming that will only further deepen and expand TNC domination, among others. So the People's Summit is a venue where we can harness, consolidate, and promote the concrete policy proposals from different countries, such as those mentioned by our friends earlier, from different regions and from different sectors, on how we can advance food sovereignty and how to transform the food systems and make it truly just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable. And this process will be facilitated through a series of national and regional events and sectoral and thematic workshops. And the outputs of these activities will feed into a declaration and action plan that will be adopted during the actual People's Summit in September. So we are inviting to join the People's Summit everyone who share the aspirations for food sovereignty and the fight for genuine agrarian reform. We invite everyone who believe in the call for land to the tillers, those who reject the wanton plunder and destruction of our natural resources for corporate profits. We call on everyone and invite everyone to share the vision of a future where communities of people and not the unaccountable and profit-hungry transnational corporations are the ones decisive in determining the direction and priorities of food and agriculture. So far, we have summits, workshops, forums, and other activities for the People's Summit happening or being planned in, as of now, we have 9 countries in Asia. So we have Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nepal, Pakistan, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. And we hope to add more countries from the region in the coming days and weeks. And we also have countries participating from Africa and Latin America. If anyone here wish to connect to the groups in the countries that I mentioned, in Asia, that are organizing or leading the activities, you can send an email to us at nolandnolife at panap.net. So that's nolandnolife at panap.net. And we can connect you with them. Additionally, part of the build up towards the People's Summit in September is we are planning to have an Asia-wide gathering that will happen sometime in August to discuss and consolidate the results of the national summits or workshops and prepare the Asian contribution to the People's Summit happening in September. And a similar process is taking place in Africa and Latin America. If you want to get updates on this and the other activities of the People's Summit, please visit our website. That's peoplesummit.foodsolve.org. Peoplesummit.foodsolve.org. Maybe someone can also type in the chat so people can visit our site and also the email. So through this website, you can also sign up to the newsletter of the People's Summit and get regular updates. And of course, you can visit our website, the PanAP website, panap.net, and follow our social media accounts in Facebook and Twitter to get regular updates on what's happening in relation to the People's Summit. Bobby?
Yeah, thank you so much, Arnold. And friends, please do join for the in the Global People Summit. And as Arnold has already indicated, the email, the website, the email is nolandnolife@penap.net. And other details will be in your chat box or in the description if you're watching out on Facebook. So now we are moving towards the very final part of this very special broadcast of Rise Up series, Peasants Rise Up series. So over to you, Christina.
Thank you so much, Bobby. So now that we're at the final home stretch of this special episode of Peasants Rise Up, we'd love to hear some words from our illustrious speakers who have, of course, spoken a lot today. So just a little more, just a very short closing message regarding what we just talked about would be greatly appreciated. Can we start with Asra, please?
Thank you so much, Christina. I think everything has been said, and I would just like to thank Rospi for her pitch on that it is the right of the people and the governments have that leeway within the WTO to take a policy direction. And I think my final message would be that we are in any way preparing in a very big way for the People's Global Summit. And that message needs to go out to every corner of not only Asia, but across our continents where our people are living. And so there has to be a massive resistance against liberalization. And we need to prepare ourselves in every community, in every village, in every city, across to stand up and take our rights for food sovereignty. I think COVID-19 has shown us very, very clearly that we can only, in the end, uh, rely on ourselves. Our communities have to be totally self-sufficient in looking after ourselves. And when we look after ourselves, we actually look after the entire world. So that is my last word, that we have to really stand up and take food sovereignty to heart and fight for it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Asra. And now let's hear from Chinaya.
Yeah.
Chinaya, sir, your final words, please.
In the context of World Localization Day, my last words are the struggle for localize the resources and globalize the people's struggles to respect and restore the land and livelihood rights for the peasantry and working class. That's all.
Thank you so much, Chinaya, sir. Now over to Wawan. Can we hear what your final words are if you're available? Okay,
Yeah. Okay. My final message is our fight for rights, fight for food sovereignty. It means that piece of is to fight against the liberalization, and it means also that we fight now for democratic development system that ensure the just and right for the people. So we need to now really aware and really rely on the people's movement and their the people's power by or organize them as the power that can build our sovereignty. Thank you.
thank you so much, Wawan. And can we hear finally, second to the last is Ma'am Rosie Guzman. Can we hear your final words, please?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for inviting Ebon to this panel. As a research institution, maybe we leave the final word that we produce the evidence, but that evidence must be turned into an advocacy. And each proposal that we come up with in any forums or in any research, each proposal is driven by people's struggles. And just a final word, people's struggles must be waged in all arenas. Thank you and good luck to the Global Summit.
Thank you so much indeed. Good luck to us and good luck to the people's struggles. And finally, Arnold, can we hear from you your last words,
Yes.
please?
Thank you, Chris. So to confront imperialist globalization, such as liberalization in food and agriculture, my fellow speakers mentioned that there must be a strong movement, a strong global people's movement. But when we talk about people's movement or global movement, it can only thrive if it's founded on solid local grassroots movements, especially from the global south, including Asia. And I think these local grassroots movements should be at the heart of any food localization movements and food sovereignty movements in Asia and elsewhere. And together, let us build this strong people's movement. Good day to everyone.
Thank you so much. And um, finally, this has been a truly, truly inspiring talk, and also slightly worrying, especially since what has been going on continues to go on, that liberalization will not stop unless we, the people, actually move and do something about it. And as Arnold had said, a strong grassroots movement needs to be built from the ground up. And as everyone has said also, the hope lies in the people. And so that is my closing statement. Bobby, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. A very inspiring session and a special session the lead up to the World Localization Day. And I will just echo what what our panelists have just said, and especially Chennaiya ji just said that about we need to reverse localization, but we also have to globalize people's struggles, unite people's struggles, and people. And as we all know that the real hope lies for in the people's struggles and people's movements. And let's hope that these gain more strength, more power as days go by. And the I just feel compelled to share about not just Mahatma Gandhi, but also Ram Manohar Lohia and so many other socialist thinkers and people's rights leaders have expressed a hope in village-based democracy or the self-sufficiency at local level. And, and they said that each village should be a zone of peace where proprietary rights of land should be given to the impoverished and actual tillers of the soil. And even landless laborers would be able to secure rehabilitation and social justice. So those people's forces, people's power are already there, and some of them are very well articulated in our constitution. And definitely we need to do a much better job in translating these values and rights and entitlements and privileges in reality to make for genuine agrarian reforms. So thanks a lot to all of you, and especially for to all our panelists and our co-host Christina Sayson. Over to you, Christina. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bobby. So that is the end of today's session, today's episode, and I'm so, so grateful to our wonderful panelists. And I'm so grateful to everyone who is here, who has listened. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, night, afternoon,
Thank you.
dawn. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you around next time.